My name is Ben Marshall. I'm 40 years old, and last year in 2018 I was diagnosed with EoE. It started over 8 years ago when I noticed some difficulty swallowing certain foodstuffs and drinks. So I visited my GP and explained what had been going on, and they didn't seem to recognise those symptoms, but they did give me a referral to my local hospital. With that referral I had an endoscopy, and the consultant, I felt, was looking at the wrong thing. It often seemed to be in situations with a particular drink or a particular foodstuff, in social situations where you're at a large table of friends or family or workmates, and there's many distractions, I suppose, to the eating and drinking process, and that would often be an environment that I would get an episode of what I now know to be a reaction to EoE. I tried to take smaller mouthfuls. I tried to eat foodstuffs that weren't so tough. So, for example, steak, I would try to eat more rare than than well done, and that seemed to some extent, reduce the impact of the issue. So the episodes became increasingly violent, and would often be in social situations, which made it embarrassing for me and also other people there, because no one wants to be sat next to the person that's coughing and spluttering. And the worst the symptoms became would be not a form of vomiting, but something akin to stomach lining or bile, or some small amount of liquid would come up. So I'd find myself having to rush to the toilet to try and unblock this blockage in my throat, coughing and spluttering as I go, going almost purple in the face. For example, at a wedding where I had an episode and had to leave the reception because I was an embarrassment to myself and everybody else with the speeches going on. I was finding the episodes getting more violent and more regular over a period of time, up to a point probably of 2016-17, where I decided to go back to my GP and try and get a diagnosis as to what was going on. And perhaps I presented it differently, perhaps my symptoms were different to how I described in my previous visit all those years before, but I got a completely, almost a polar opposite, different response on this occasion, where they were concerned enough with the fact that I was having difficulty eating that they thought there might be some blockage or growth within the throat. So they rushed me through. It was Christmas time, I seem to remember, and between Christmas and New Year I had a referral. So within 2 weeks from the GP's appointment to the actual appointment with the consultant was less than 2 weeks, and it wasn't until the February that I actually got the results, which came back as a sign of globules or ribbing on my esophagus. So when I had the letter from the GP stating that they suspected it to be EoE, the first thing I did is Google it, because I'd never heard of it, I had no understanding. I still today refer to it as EoE because I couldn't pronounce the full name, and I couldn't find much online about it actually. I couldn't really find many examples of what it was. It seemed to be a lot of clinical information rather than public information. So it was still a little bit in the dark as to what it was, which changed when I met my consultant for the first time in, I think it was the May of 2018, when I met with Ziva Morelji, my consultant. And it was a day that changed so many things for me. It seems so bizarre to think back to that now, but it was the first time in 8 years that somebody had sat and listened to my symptoms, that asked probing questions as to what might cause it and the occurrences that caused it, and really listened to me and took seriously my concerns that this was a very uncomfortable thing that was affecting my way of life. And it felt such a relief actually when my consultant said, "You've got typical symptoms. You're a typical patient with typical symptoms, and this is what EoE is," and described it and showed images of what it looked like in the esophagus. And I left that appointment feeling for the first time in 8 years positive about what was happening to me. And one of the options was to take out few food types over a period of time, and after the removal of each food type I would have to have another visit to the hospital, another biopsy. Thought of having to go through a biopsy again on a regular basis after each change of foodstuff didn't seem very appealing to me. So the alternative was taking steroids via an inhaler. I was prescribed steroids and taking them via a Ventolin style inhaler, but instead of breathing them in, swallowing them. So you're swallowing the steroid that's getting direct access to your throat. I went away and I had my first prescription, which was a bit tricky because the pharmacist didn't know what it was, or certainly didn't recognise the method of taking this steroid, which was written on the prescription. And I took the prescription once in the morning and once in the evening, and within a week to 10 days I felt that it was a surprise to me that I hadn't had any form of reaction, and certainly within 3 to 4 weeks I was delighted to find that I hadn't had any episodes whatsoever. When it came to getting a repeat prescription from my GP, they refused to issue it because they didn't recognise this as a treatment for the condition. So I had to go back to my consultant to get another prescription. Another issue that I found with obtaining this steroid is taking it to a pharmacist, because they don't recognise the method of use. Often there's some misunderstanding. I have also had a blood test recently to check how much of the steroid has been absorbed into my other organs, and I haven't had the results of that yet. How I felt with these episodes, the more it went on, the more you can't help but think what it might be, and without a proper diagnosis, if you Google things stuck in your throat or trouble swallowing, you get some pretty scary results. So it was quite an upsetting situation that I felt something was not right, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I was trying to manage it myself,